On behalf of the Klezmer Institute, I'd like to welcome Michael Aylward to Gramophone in Focus. Thank you for coming today and joining us. As many people know, many of you know here, Michael has been feverishly working on an exhaustive and comprehensive discography of European recordings of Jewish music for something like 20 years now. And
1994.
okay, even longer.
I was going to
So,
say I met Mike in probably 1993 or 94, and he was had just started this work, so I can testify.
fantastic. So, thank you all for coming. For those of you, yeah, that's it. I'm just going to say thanks for coming. And let's just jump right into it because we have a lot of wonderful music to listen to and we have some great stories that I know we're going to unfold. And so I'd like to just turn it over to Michael right here at the beginning to tell us the story of how you came to be working on this discography and in particularly how you came to be working in the EMI archives.
So now I'm on.
Yeah, now.
Well, the first thing to say is I never ever intended, I set out to write a discography. It just evolved over the years. What happened was that in the early 80s, I developed an interest in Jewish music, spurred mainly by all the historical re-releases of Klezmer music that were coming out thick and fast. And after many years, it struck me that it was strange that I think of all the LPs, totting the tracks up together would have been 100, 150 tracks, but only 3, I think, had ever been recorded in Europe, which I thought a bit odd. So I started asking around whether anyone knew about this, and I was told either forget it. There's no way that any Jewish recordings could have been made in Europe, and if there were, it would have been on a very, very small scale, because it was. Oh, have we got an echo?
Yeah, I think we've got the echo.
Yeah. Okay. So the general response was forget it. It was Eastern Europe. It's far too primitive for anything like that. And I thought, well, that's silly. I know a bit about Eastern Europe and Eastern European history, and it's not the place of popular imagination. And I just had an inspired idea that I'd go up to the National Sound Archive in London, which in those days was housed in a really lovely, stately old Edwardian mansion tucked away behind the Albert Hall, and started looking. And what I was looking for at that stage were actual records, discs. And they had everything card indexed, and there were quite a few hundred of them, but they all turned out to be the more of the American stuff, lots and lots of duplicates of recordings that had already been released. And I spent 4 or 5 hours doing that, and it was getting a bit monotonous. I was getting absolutely nowhere, apart from one Pepe Littman, which was described in brackets as in V poor condition, which struck me as very poignant. And so I thought, well, this is getting nowhere. And I got up to stretch my legs, and I just walked around the reading room. And I saw they had a huge set of card indexes in the center. So I started looking through what they had there. And it turned out that they had a very, very large collection of record company catalogues. And I know now that I know more, that probably is the biggest collection in the world. And so I started looking through it, and it was all extremely well organized. And in fact, and I still marvel at this, someone in the past had gone through all these, and there's not hundreds, probably thousands of catalogues and had indexed them. So it was, and it was arranged, so it was arranged not just by a record company name, but by countries of origin or themes. And
think
it quickly became apparent that there were lots and lots of Jewish ones. So I just called up the first one that was mentioned, catalogue that was mentioned, that had purportedly a Jewish section on it, and put it in the machine, or rather it was put in the machine for me, because I never did get the hang of it, and started working my way through it. And 2 hours later, I was going towards the end of the reel, and it was very much getting towards closing time in the library, and there'd been absolutely nothing. They're all Viennese catalogues, and it was just what you would have expected. Loads of waltzes, Viennese folk music, loads of unbelievable number of military marches. And I thought, well, it's got to be in here somewhere, otherwise they wouldn't have misindexed it like that. And within a couple of minutes, I very much towards the end of the reel, I did come across my first collection of Jewish recordings. There was a couple of sets of cantorial music made in Warsaw, Sirota obviously one of them, and quite a lot of recordings by this theatre in Lemberg, just said Jewish Theatre Lemberg. And I had about 3, 4, 5 pages of those, which I duly kind of printed off and went home. And 2 weeks later, went up to have another go, came back with another haul, and that's how it started. Every fortnight, I would go up there, work my way through these microfilms, always coming back with a nice haul. And I started entering this information that was on the in the record catalogues into simple table format, computer, you know, which is the basis of the discography that I have at the moment, is still in that format, which is pretty much serves its purpose, but is no longer useful. It has outgrown what
technology
I can provide. But I kept on working out the archive, going up to the archive there for about 3 years, and then there was this fellow who was writing a lot of very interesting articles about the early ethnic recordings of ethnic music made in the very early days of the record industry, and his name was Paul Vernon. And I got hold of his address, and he invited me up to meet him in his house in North London. And he really set me off in the right direction. And he told me kind of 2 things. He said, have you tried applying for research at the EMI archive? And I said, well, no, as far as I've been told that it's been closed to researchers for many years now. And he said, oh, yeah, it was, but not anymore. He gave me the contact details of who to approach there. And he said, have you ever heard of Alan Kelly? I said, no, never heard of him in my life. And he said, well, you need to write to him as well. So I went back home, I wrote to Alan Kelly, I wrote to the EMI archive. Within 48 hours, a huge brown manila envelope came through my letterbox. It was from Alan, who'd given me 600 or so titles, which would have taken me a good year to garner from going up to London. And I had a couple of days after that, I had a letter from the EMI archive saying, just tell us precisely what it is you want, and we'll certainly consider. So I wrote back telling them, and they gave me the all clear. And so I went up there, met Ruth Edge, who was the head archivist, and I stopped going to the Old Sound Archive in London because it's much easier to zip through a printed catalogue than to work your way through a microfilm.
Absolutely. So, but let me just pause here for just a moment. Like up until this point, you haven't actually heard any of this music. Is
Oh,
that
good
correct?
Lord. No, yeah, absolutely. And not for many years to come. But I'm not quite sure when I did. Uh, no, probably for the first 8 years or so, I didn't hear, certainly none of the ones that I was uncovering. With the advent, I came online in '98, and that's really kind of started providing me with things that would never have been accessible to me had I been working in pre-internet days. So it's probably late '90s that I began to hear dribs and drabs of what had actually kind of been recorded.
Okay, so I'm gonna turn back. You can see I'm handing you the microphone back. So now you've arrived, you're walking in the door at the EMI archive. Now I'm curious, I've never been there and probably most of us here in the room haven't been there. Like, what's it like? Let's talk about the old premises, the old,
Yes,
original.
yeah.
What did you find when you walk in the door and what was it like working there?
It's I found a palace. It was custom made. It just wasn't kind of premises that they'd taken over and adjusted. Everything was ideal. You could not fault it in any way, really. It was
And
divided
and
into two sections. You had the document section and the place where the records were actually kept, and that was off limits. The record store, but I didn't need to see the discs themselves for my purposes. The catalogues were quite satisfactory,
And what
uh,
were the when you say catalogs, were they card catalogs? Were they book catalogs? What are we talking about here?
think kind of magazine for. Haven't we got some to
Oh,
show?
you mean like gramophone catalogs?
Yeah, this is sorry. Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
yes.
right.
I know. I'm not talking about the card index type of catalogue anymore. No, I'm talking about the actual record company catalogues with prints and dealers
And
with.
how many of those do you think there were in that?
God, I mean, thousands, absolutely thousands. The room was vast, like aircraft hangar, and it was a good. No, I used to have to get on top of a very high ladder to get at the ones on the top shelf, and yeah,
And how were they? Were they organized by date or by location or by
they were organised date order within location order.
by country?
Yeah, that's what I meant by location. Yeah, by country. Yeah.
Right. And even by country, by city?
No, no, no.
I suppose they probably just print Italian catalogs in Italian for Italy, and they would be cataloged together, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
it would have made no difference to me anyway, because what makes researching um, Jewish music like that very different is that, for example, in my case, I'm say I'd been researching Japanese music, then all I needed to would go to the Japanese section, work my way through that. All the Jewish recordings were spread throughout every country in Europe, barring some obvious non-starters like Spain, Portugal,
mm,
uh, as it turned out, Italy, nothing there, and the Scandinavian countries. I never did find anything there, and I never really spent too much time. But so yes, I had to work my way through every catalogue printed and that survived for every European country apart from the ones I've just mentioned, and that took me about 6 years, going up there every 2 or 3 weeks.
so this is from the years
That
two.
was that was from I started going up there about '97,
Mhm.
I think, and it all closed down in 2003 when there was a huge internal upheaval, and all the permanent staff left within 1 month.
Right. But in that time period between 97 and 2003, had you pretty much worked your way through all of those catalogs that you were looking at?
I think definitely I'd worked my way through nearly all of the catalogues. What I wasn't able to do was to finish off, because this is the first part of the job was finding out what had been made, what had been produced. The second half was finding out how many copies survived. And I was only halfway through that operation of matching my lists of what had been produced with what was on the company's stock books. And yeah, that's still a job that's to be done, to be completed.
And when you mean stock books, as in what was still in the warehouse?
Yes, precisely.
The other part of this Emi Archive, right? So
the stock books just being big ledgers with a row of catalogue numbers.
And were they contemporary to the time? Were those stock books contemporary to the time when the records were produced, or had they been re-gone over in some later time period?
No. The stock books were actually prepared in the mid 1970s.
I see.
That was the first time any stock taking had ever taken place in the country, in the company, and yes.
Fantastic. And so
fantastic, but they've been compiled by a load of students.
Okay, so not so fantastic.
It's manageable, but
Sorry, but what is the date range of the catalogs? What's the earliest and the last date catalog?
The earliest 1899, and the last ones that I looked at would have been late 1930s.
So I'd love to, does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, wow, 1899.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, yes, this is something. Yeah, 1899 is the year that the first Jewish recordings were made in Europe. The actual earliest one is a Hungarian one, but after that, there's a series that was made by, what's his name? I can't remember. Not Friedkin. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Anyway, a series of about a dozen recordings that were made in London by a cantor from Krakow. And those copies of those first ever recordings, the whole set is still in the EMI archive.
So Martin Schwartz, you have a question. Do you want to unmute and ask real quick? I see you have your hand raised, Martin. Do you want to unmute, please, and ask your question? We can't hear you. Okay, Martin, I'm going to ask you to please write your question to me in the chat, and I'll ask the question because your sound isn't coming through, and we'll get there in a minute, okay? So thank you. Sorry, Michael. I would like to have you describe a little bit about, Mark Slobin has asked us a little bit like what is the date range. I'd love to hear just a little tiny bit about kind of what you found, and to also confirm that even at this point, up to 2003, you haven't heard anything from the EMI archives. Is that right?
Oh, definitely nothing from the archives. No. Not until, Julian, when did we do Chekhov's band? Was that about 2015? That
was 2015.
That was the first time I actually saw and heard any of those discs.
Okay, amazing. So I think many of us might be wondering like how it was or why it was that you kept on with this monumental task, even though you hadn't been able to hear any of these recordings that you knew exist.
Oh, because I'm obsessive.
Okay, well, all right. Welcome to our world, I guess. We're all here for that, and we're all here for you being that and doing that. So, and we definitely We definitely thank you for it. So when we were talking the other day, you told me this wonderful story uh, about the Gramophone Company. And one of the things that you said that really struck my attention was that you said that the people who founded the Gramophone Company were idealists. And you explained what you meant by that. And I think that it would be interesting for everybody here to hear you talk about that, because it is, you've said it in your short paper, that the fact that this EMI archive exists at all is very unusual for any number of reasons, but one of the reasons has to do with the founders of the company, I think. And so why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, let's say for a start that is my supposition.
Right.
They were, to a certain extent, idealists. Now, I'm sure other companies would have archived their output for a while, at least, for as long as the discs were commercially viable. But I don't think that they would keep discs that were literally past their sell-by date. But EMI did, and meticulously, extremely meticulously. In fact, they kept 2 copies of everything. They'd keep a copy. They'd have the metal master from which the discs were pressed, and they would keep a copy of the shellac disc as well, as kind of backup. All the metal masters were destroyed during the war, unfortunately, and not by accident. It's a sad little story, but famously there was a big domestic government campaign during the war, which was, I think it went under the slogan something like "Saucepans for Spitfires."
Right.
And the aim was to get everyone in the country to surrender every bit of possible scrap metal that they had, including their front garden railings, you name it, any unwanted tools or kitchen utensils.
Right.
And they sequestered metal masters from
Well, it was a war. There was a war on, and
no, it gets worse, I'm afraid. It takes a surprise ending. And we learned only fairly recently that the whole thing was a con.
Oh no.
All this stuff was absolutely worthless. I can Mao Zedong did something kind of similar in China, some big.
Sure. So I believe you.
And what happened was all this stuff was just sent to landfill.
Okay. Let's not dwell on the tragedy of that particular tragedy. I want to turn back to these, back to the founders of this company and the fact that they managed to save the stuff against all economic and logical things. Because if any of us have ever worked with shellac, it's super heavy and fragile. It's fragile and heavy and fragile, which are not two things that go together. So they kept all of these extra discs. They kept all the metal masters up until the Second World War, which we're not going to talk about for a moment. But what I'm interested is in this period of 1899, gramophone is starting to take off, and there's a new product on the market, and the Gramophone Company, the founders, they needed to sell this product. So can you tell me about, I don't know, how they found people to sell records, and some of the things that we talked about yesterday that had to do with that stuff?
I don't know. The answer to that is I don't know. Certainly, I don't think they went out and found people to start records. People started up record jobs and record shops at their own initiative. That's quite clear. I don't think for example, the Gramophone Company ever went out and set up shops anywhere. The shops grew up out there, and a Gramophone Company would go out there and visit them, obviously, because they were potential potential sellers of their products. But that's the way it works. And these record shops were also served another very important function. It was certainly true of the Gramophone Company and certainly true of Sirena Record in Warsaw, that they used these record shops also as talent scouts. Because the people in London, sitting there in London, they had no idea what the music scene was like in Odessa or Kiev or Athens or you name it. But they knew that the owners of these record shops were there, and they had good local knowledge, and they knew what would sell and what wouldn't sell. So they would decide that I think we ought to explore or exploit this particular area. They would send one of their agents out there, and he would go the rounds of the record shops and recruit them as agents. And once they got their sound engineers ready, they would write to these record shops and say, one of our sound engineers is coming out. What do you recommend that he record? And they would come up with a list, and the engineer would duly kind of go out there, meet these people, record them, send the discs back to London, who would then decide whether they would be pressed or not, pressed and sold or not. And actually, nearly all of them, it would seem, were, which is quite interesting actually, because it's only very rarely in the tabulations of all these that we have of all this all these recordings that were produced. Do you get gaps with the comment declined?
Right.
I doubt whether even 1% of what the engineers recorded didn't actually make it onto the market.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. So you mentioned yesterday that that you have an intuition that many of the shopkeepers, these A&R, these dual position of like the keepers of the shops and also the A&R reps for the various companies, that at least in the Russian Empire, many of them were Jewish. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. That's not my intuition. That's a fact. Yes.
Okay.
I think the same applies to Poland. And from what I see in the Austrian newspapers, I think it's probably the case throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire. About Germany, I'm not sure, or from, mind you, nothing ever happened in France. Actually, that is another topic. What was recorded in which countries? And there are some surprises. Nothing was recorded in France from until after the war. I'd say tiny amounts, no more than a couple of dozen. Hardly anything was recorded in the Czechoslovakia area, either before the First World War or after. And you wouldn't expect any klezmer music because that had more or less died out then in the 19th century. You wouldn't expect any Yiddish theatre because there wasn't any Yiddish theatre to speak of. But you would, I mean, they did have some fine cantors, and it's surprising that I've only ever found 2 recordings.
Oh, you say when you said there was no recording of Jewish music in France?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. That's what I'm talking. Yeah, across the board.
I don't know if the Anglo-Francophone disputes carried over into the Gramophone Company recording techniques, or if you're just talking about the Jewish material.
I also recall that before the war, France had a very, very small Jewish population.
Yeah.
So that could be the explanation there.
Mm-hmm.
In Hungary, but this just applies to the Gramophone Company. There were some all the Yiddish recordings that were made by artists from Gimpel's Theatre.
Right.
because they were hugely popular.
Right. What did you? So, tell us what you found. I want to start spinning some discs. So I have one that I'm dying to. I've got queued up, and I can't wait for us to listen to. But tell us what you found. It's like, so we've talked about what you didn't find, and you didn't find Jewish music in France, and you didn't find Jewish music in the Czech lands. But what did you find, and what kinds of things did you find as you started opening up these catalogs and sort of putting together this picture of the kinds of music that were recorded, Jewish music that was recorded in these?
Well, there are the usual categories. There was klezmer music, not much, as an overall percentage, really small and rather disappointing. And a lot of that is Belf.
Right.
Take away Belf and you're not left with much.
Right.
And that goes for the Gramophone Company and across the board. How on earth they managed to set up this near monopoly, I'll never understand. So you had, and then you had the Yiddish theatre, obviously, and cantorial music, which ran 50, they had in about equal numbers, they were. And then I found, and this was something which came to light over a long period of time, there were lots of recordings, which I suppose nowadays we would call them crossover, or part this, part that. A good example is, or two good examples. One is in Vienna, was producing a huge number of recordings which were obviously not purely Jewish, but definitely there was something Jewish about them.
Right.
And I only found out after, it took some time. And again, had it not been for the internet, I wouldn't have clued onto it at all. All these artists performed at the same venue in Vienna. It was known as the Budapester Orpheumgesellschaft, the Budapest Orpheum Company or Society. And their staple fare was delivered in a mixture of Viennese dialect and Yiddish.
Amazing.
And it was hugely popular amongst Viennese Jews and non-Jews. Everybody went there. And by all accounts, it really was quite some place. And there was as I'll discover much later, a similar scene in Budapest, which had a huge number of nightclubs and cabarets, nearly all of which were operated by Jewish entrepreneurs.
Jewish entrepreneurs.
And most of the artists were Jewish.
Right. Right. I think
Pepe Littman used to perform in a lot of those.
amazing. So I think you told me at one point that the heyday of Jewish recordings in Europe, the sort of big golden years, is from 1905 up until the First World War. Is that
Yes.
right? And then there's kind of a lull after the First World War up to about 23, and then
Expect they're just recovering from the
Right.
war.
and then afterwards everything changed.
Yeah. Several things changed. One was, and I think this was probably what happens, is that there's a really steep decline in the number of Jewish recordings that are made. Are we looking at this overall, or still from the view of EMI and the Gramophone Company?
Well, I think we can look at from both perspectives, but
So the Gramophone Companies, the overall picture is pretty much the same, except that there is an additional reason which doesn't apply elsewhere. So yeah, the war comes to an end and nothing much happens at all for about 40 years, and then it does start up again, but never on the same scale. And I think the number one reason behind all that is the loss of the very, very lucrative Russian market,
Ah, yes, I remember now. Yeah, you mentioned that. Right.
which was really important source of income for those pre-war companies, because it was Russia was going wet places economically in those days. It really was, and foreign companies were piling in to set up branches for their various industries and whatnot. So that was a big reason. Another reason is that, and it's very dramatic when you're working your way through these catalogues, from about 1933 onwards. I mean, this kind of as a tidal wave sweeps across the Atlantic and across the English Channel of Anglo-Saxon, in inverted commas, music, and in particular, jazz in all its kind of forms.
All of its forms.
It down, and all the new dance crazes come from America, and yeah, the American worldwide cultural dominion starts pretty early on.
Starts early, but
No,
in this pre First World War period, I feel like I mean, so I'm gonna mix a metaphor here, in a wildly inappropriate way, but I feel like what you described to me in this period between 1905 and up until the First World War is something of a Wild West in terms of those record companies recording anything and anyone that they could find.
yeah, that's an important point to make there, actually, is, and it's another reason I think why the sales went off the way that they did. Up until 1914, the gramophone records themselves were not really regarded as
They weren't
primarily
the product.
as a way of making income,
Hmm.
but as a way of persuading people to buy a gramophone player, because that is where the real money was. So those records was sold. They sold off kind of quite cheaply. Very little profit was made on them, and they recorded a huge kind of spectrum. Covered the huge, what they recorded covered the huge kind of spectrum, because they could afford to experiment.
Well, and if you when we're talking about a golden age of Jewish recordings, we're just really honing in on Jewish recordings, knowing that this can be repeated in other locations with other kinds of music. If you've got a bunch of Jewish shop owners who are selling the players and acting as the talent scouts for the recording space, then it should be no surprise to us that in this period we have lots of cantorial recordings, lots of Yiddish theater, lots of this comedy, all kind. Did you say to me that there's about half of the recordings are cantorial in the Jewish?
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, the fact that so many were recorded. I think you've said you've documented about 15,000 sides.
Yeah, well,
And if possibly something approaching 7,000 of those are cantorial. I mean, is that?
Yeah, that would figure, yeah.
And that's a lot of cantorial music that probably we haven't had access to hearing yet.
Oh, there'll be many unfamiliar names. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there are industrial quantities of sirota and kvartin.
Amazing.
I've never totted them all up, and that's one of the disadvantages of the discography in its present format, which is a separate file for each record company. So compiling statistics is, well, it has to be done by hand, and it's labor intensive. I'm very often asked, how many recordings of X, what they kind of genre were recorded, and I could tell you, but it's going to take me probably a fortnight of quite hard
All
work.
right. We're going to solve these problems through modern computing technology at some point, and probably, hopefully, not in the far distant future. But to spin a disc, I think I'd like since we're talking about cantorial music, let's listen to this cantor Boruch Lieb.
I forgot to tell you, I found a much better recording of this afternoon.
Ah, could you do, how about this? I want to play a different disc. Why don't you email it to me? You email that to me, and then we're gonna shift gears, and I'd like to listen to Helena, if that's okay. Actually, while we're doing a little tech, does anybody have a question? I see that there's a super active chat that I am not following. So does anybody have a question? While Michael is forwarding me that track. If you have a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Jeanette. I have a question.
Yes.
Will this recorded talk be available online?
Yes, it will be available online at some point in the not too distant future. We do sort of embargo them for a month or so, but we will be putting them up online. And if you have a reason that you want to share share this with somebody in particular, please get in touch with me afterwards.
I see. Thank you.
Sure. And in fact, this is a good opportunity for me to mention that our last year's series, the Fieldwork in Focus, which really was all about doing fieldwork with Jewish musicians and looking for Jewish music behind the Iron Curtain, in countries behind the Iron Curtain, both before and after the Revolution. So we spoke with Vasile Kisalitsa, we spoke with Christian David, and we spoke with Speranța Radulescu in Bucharest. And all of those are online at they're all online at the Klezmer Institute's YouTube channel, along with a beautiful book talk with Judith Friedjeshi, who is also here today, about her book, Writing on Water. So here, I think we have the track. Okay, so this is a much cleaner version of this track. Michael, do you want to give us a little wind up to what we're going to listen to here?
This is a recording made in Warsaw. I can't remember when. Does it say 1911, something like that, by an incredible, I think, cantor who I'd never heard of, called Schulman. And apparently he was either the father or the grandfather of the famous singer Zinovi Schulman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is just such an intense performance.
Yeah, so we're going to be playing slightly shorter clips of some of the later tracks so that we can get to more music, but I think this one is worth listening to pretty much in full. So let's just sit back and give this a listen. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think a very distinctive thing about that recording is the engineer really caught the choir well. Normally they don't. But,
Yeah, that is, and then that's a much cleaner,
it
uh,
is,
rec-
isn't it?
yeah, than the other one
Well,
we were listening.
incidentally, the EMI archive has the whole session, all 6 recordings.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can you tell that little anecdote about the cantor who was? There's a fellow who got paid very handsomely, and did you tell this in your story? I can't find the page. I can't remember the guy's name.
Kvartin, yes,
Yes.
Yeah, some of these cantors would have made a very large amount of money. In his memoirs, Kvartin says that, and he's talking about the very first recordings that he was making, and that he was making in one day. So in one day, we would probably record about 20, would have been fairly kind of average. Recording about 20 titles or so, he would earn what his congregation paid him in a year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's not bad work if you can get it. You said that he was even trying to get more from some other company.
Yeah, he did it rather charmingly, actually. He said, I don't know, I went to a patio somewhere else and I asked them for more. But it didn't work.
They didn't take him. So speaking of like beautiful recording techniques, I want to play a track that actually that John owns, and that I knew of before we met and started listening to this track, and it turns out we share a passion for a female singer named Helena Gespas, and I want to play this track. Some of you have heard a little clip of it. On the promos that we've been putting out. But I want to play this track also pretty much in full. And what I mean, it's an incredible and beautiful performance, but what I hear, one of the things that I hear in this track is the way that through a simple metal or wooden horn, the recording engineer was able to capture an incredibly intimate performance of between the violin, the voice, and the piano. And that because it apparently has come from one of these pristine EMI sides, it doesn't have all of the surface noise and the scratches that so many of us have come to know and love from the scratchy 78s that we listen to. So that's what I would suggest that you want to listen to. But Michael, do you want to cue up this track and tell us what the song is about and some things about Helena that you may have discovered in your journeys?
Well, as regards to the song itself, I only know have a very vague outline of what it is because the words are still quite difficult to understand for me. But basically, it's the title, Yetzer Hora, means literally something like evil inclination or the evil urge, which is kind of synonymous. They mean sex. And it's about a young girl, Ying and Shane, who goes off to America and falls victim to the Yetzer Hora. And I don't know exactly what happens to her, but it's not very good. That's quite obvious. And I get the distinct impression listening to Helena Gespas sing this here, that in a sense she is singing this song and it's about her. I mean, she makes it about her, because there's something, there's a real mystery surrounding her. She was hugely, immensely kind of popular in her time, to the extent that she's one of the few artists that these record companies there's a particular accolade they would put their signature on the record label. And so the only other person that I know actually that had that honor bestowed on him was Sirota. So to be treated in the same way that Sirota was, I mean, that is one hell of a compliment. And despite all that, and the public really adored her and she was famous, we know almost nothing about her, apart from the fact that she came from, she had two quite famous sisters who made it. One was Frida Zwiebel Goldstein, and the other one was Ella Wallerstein, who both made it to quite very successfully in New York. But they haven't left behind any descendants who might be able to kind of fill us in. But she just disappeared. It's Silvertide reckons that he actually puts a question mark, died in 1907, but we know for sure that she was recording up to 1909. And earlier on this year, I found her booked into a hotel, into a spa hotel in Bohemia in 1910. So whether she did die or just, and she's booked into the hotel with Oscar Zengult, the violin, who it's not, it's obviously him on this record. I mean, his style is very recognizable, but he was her accompanist on so many recordings. And I'll say no more.
All right. Well, I think with,
and I think this relationship, that obviously there was some kind of relationship. I mean, I don't know what it was between them, and that's just somehow reflected in the ebb and flow between them, which is just perfect as far as I'm concerned.
all right. Without further ado. And you can hear them speeding up at the end because they know they're he's literally running out of time to finish the last little outro.
Well, that's one thing that Kvartin found really difficult, according to his memoirs, was tailoring everything so it would fit on one side.
It's
It was really difficult with cantorial music. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I mean, these engineers just do such a magnificent job of placing you know, the singer and the violin and the piano just right in the right position. So I mean, I just remember we listened to it together on one of our early conversations, and I just was struck by how, exactly as you say, how intimate the sound is, not only between them, but that we can hear it in that way, in a way that sounds very modern, like it was recorded with, you know, microphones and mixed and all of the things that we're used to, but it's in this very simple technology, pre-electric microphone technology. And I mean, I wonder if that's part of the reason why she was so popular on these recordings, is that there was this intimacy in her voice in one sense, and also between the two performers. Whatever the nature of that intimacy was, we don't know, we can only speculate, but what we can hear is that there's a musical relationship very well recorded, you know. So we've got more just to listen to, but Michael, can you tell us a little bit about, Joel Rubin, thank you for that. He says that he's been learning recently that engineers sometimes used more than one horn for a single feed. I don't know if that impacted these types of recordings. Now that is really interesting.
Yeah, I'd never heard that before. And there's a fantastic project at the University of Huddersfield in the UK, and they're trying to recreate the conditions under which these cylinder and also shellac recordings were made. They're making new recordings using the old technology and trying to figure out like the horn placement and all this stuff. It's super fascinating.
That is super cool. Okay, keep us posted, Joel. Like I am, if you come across a link sometime in the future, let us know. We'll share it around to our sort of collected list here. That's fabulous. But Michael, before we run out of time, I do want to ask you a little bit about the way that you have actually put together this discography, and the discography and the way that it has come to exist today, and which is a little different from, you know, your notebooks, handwritten notebooks that you collected at the EMI and then came back and put into the tables. But it seems like there's also additional information that you have put there. And so I'm going to share screen just for a minute, and we're going to look at this Zonophone, just one page out of the Zonophone catalog, or out of your Zonophone document. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what we've got here, and how it was that you took what you found at the EMI archive catalog information and then amplified it to get here?
Yeah, well, what you're looking at is just a specimen page from the Zonophone, what they called Orient catalogue. And it's the information that you've got here comes from basically two different sources. One from the record company catalogues, and another from the gramophone company's documentation, of domestic documentation, store of documentation, like correspondence with engineers, their ledgers and whatever. So it's fairly straightforward, really. So you have your catalog number.
Right, you have a catalog number, but then there's a catalog number, but what I see here are several catalog numbers. So can you sort of, for those of us who are not quite so deep into the discography lore, can you tell us a little bit more about this section here?
Yeah, I'll be rearranging this completely. There's no need for this column. This should be just X10. You've got 10, 10, 50. That's catalog number. CW coupled with that one, but then it's also coupled with that number. This mysterious V asterisk sign which appeared. It took me years to discover that just meant for sale only within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So
Ah.
yeah, that's, it's not very interesting.
Right, except that it is, except that it is, well, I guess for the people in this room, it is all interesting, I guess I'll say that.
Then you have the matrix number, which is supposed to be the pot of gold. But matrix numbers are hugely overrated, because unless you know the code, the number is meaningless, which I think is it was the situation last time I looked at work going on Homochord records. They've got all these matrix numbers, but they haven't got a clue what it means, because they haven't got the key to it. But the EMI we have, and we know that any matrix number ending in R would belong to MH, who is Max Hamper, one of the Hamper brothers. And by knowing the matrix number, we can then look up in the company's kind of documentation and find the
engineer.
Every week, the gramophone company's sound engineers would return to head office a list of everything that they had recorded during the week, and these are so-called weekly returns. And EMI has got a pretty much, I think, complete set of all the weekly returns that were ever kind of made out.
And we talked about, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Michael.
Sorry?
Hold up a second. I just want to interject one thing. That we talked about this yesterday, that EMI, well, Gramophone Company, wasn't only recording Jewish sides, but they were recording music all over the British Empire and all over the world, and handling it all through the post and telegram. Is that right?
That's right, yes. It's a miracle what you can do with modern technology. Before 1914, they were sending teams of recording engineers into Tibet.
Amazing.
There's hardly anywhere that they didn't go, apart from North and South America, because they did a deal with Victor to divide up the world. And America got the Americas, and we got the Gramophone Company got the rest.
And so when you're talking about what is held in those EMI archives, you're talking about the work product, a huge and substantial portion of the work, not only in Europe, but all over the world, that is held in that archive. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
So it's it's like its own UNESCO World Heritage Site in some ways, as a treasure trove of the music of peoples, all around the world, some of which was high culture in that location, some of which was popular culture. It was whatever that local A&R rep, the guy selling the gramophone machines, thought would sell to that local population. So I don't know, it really blows my mind to think about what was accomplished there, and just the fact that it's so far, been preserved, So anyway, carry on, Michael. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So yes, then with the matrix number, you can find the engineer's weekly return, and that will tell you a couple of things that you can't get from the record company, which is the recording date and the recording location. Having said that, I'm looking at this, and we've got the matrix number, and we've got the recording location, but all we've got is a vague date of 1907. So I don't know why that would be. Perhaps he just didn't bother to date it properly. But then you got the artist and then the title details, self-explanatory. But what I do here is I note down every version, every way that this information is listed, even if it's just slight variations in sometimes it can be quite dramatically different, but usually it's just slight variations in the spelling. But it is important, I think, to kind of capture that, because in the digital world now, when we're searching, we are pulling in key search words, and
Spelling counts.
and they have to match exactly in the same way that if you type in the URL and there's just one digit wrong, then you will get a dud result.
Right.
So we need to know all the possibilities of how these recordings could be filed away. So we need all the variations in spelling and so on. Then there's a very interesting comment: where is there a copy? In this case, there's a copy at EMI, but you'll also find there'll be a copy, copies elsewhere in the world or in the hands of some private collector. Or if it's a private collector, I don't put their details down. I just put PC, a private collector, because they value their privacy.
Right.
And then there you got the reissued on or reissue of, and it is important to know that.
Right.
And because you will then, if you pick up one of these reissues, you may think that it's an original, and it's not, and it's just a duplicate of one which you probably already, you may well have a copy of.
Right. I want to share.
That is the basic information that you get in any discography. I mean, any discography will have precisely those details and no more. The only way in which in which my discography is different is I do track down where there is I do spend a lot of time searching archives worldwide, looking for copies and noting that in the appropriate column.
Right. And I believe you've given the statistic that you've documented something approaching 15,000 sides or 15,000 unique performances, and of which you believe roughly 5,000 are extant, even if not available. Is that about right?
Yeah.
I want to share one more
But
image.
there are two major sources there. One is the EMI archive, and the other one is the National Sound Archive in Jerusalem.
Right. I wanted to share also this amazing thing that you shared with me, which is a way to interpret the catalog numbers to help you understand what instruments are being played. So can you walk us through? I'm going to scroll in a tiny bit so people can see, but can you walk us through what this is all about?
Well, I don't know why they did it, but they did do it, and it's quite amazing. It's a very sophisticated way of making their catalogue numbers meaningful. Because from this chart, you will see you've got along the top headings, you've got localities, countries, and on the left-hand column going down, you have got things like musical genres. Is it Hebrews and male, female vocals, duets, choruses, bagpipes with drums, bugle calls, mandolins, bagpipes, or single bagpipes, cello, violin, balalaikas, piccolo. And so if you go, let's say you're interested in balalaikas.
Yeah.
You'll go across to third column and go up the top is Bohemian. So record catalog numbers, sonophone record catalog, sonophone record catalog numbers will have this 18500 series within it.
And then so basically as part of this process of being able to, the sellers and the catalogers, the people working at the back at the London office could look at a catalog number on the record and tell a lot about what it was, even if they didn't read the language.
Yeah,
written on the disc.
I'm not quite sure how useful that would be. I mean, it's all clever stuff, but I think they could have lived without it.
So, well, sure. But they didn't. They came up with it, and most importantly, you have the code, so you can read the code, and know what the intention was. What I'm curious about is if you know, and I haven't asked you this question before. I'm curious to know: is there like who did the typography on those labels, and do we know anything about that stuff? You know, the labels are, you know, they're typed, they're printed, they're slapped on the discs. Like, was that all done in London? Was that all done in various different places around the world? I mean,
where the records were actually made, that varied. I think initially it was all done in London, and then they started opening up factories abroad in Europe. The biggest one, I think, was the one in Riga, in Latvia, which then was part of the Russian Empire. They opened up one in Alsik, as it then was before the First World War, in Bohemia. I think they were I think they were the three main factories in Europe. So from about, I'm not quite sure, I think it was about 1908 that they opened the Riga factory, and from that date on, everything which was destined for the Eastern European market would be kind of pressed and distributed from Riga. Although there's a quite interesting afterlife of the Riga factory. I often wonder what happened to it. And only this year that I did find out, and it answered another question, because it's been quite obvious to me for a long time that the National Sound Archive in Moscow looks very, very interesting, but there are there's not much available in the way of catalog. It doesn't have a kind of proper online catalogue. It has long descriptions of what each section contains, but it doesn't go into kind of great detail. It just gives you an overall idea or feel for what they've got. And it turns out that that during the First World War, as the Germans were advancing on Riga, the Russians evacuated most of the contents of the Riga pressing plant, of the Gramophone Company's Riga pressing plant, to Moscow, where after the war it became the core collection of the National Sound Archive. So I'm hoping that, and I do know what they have put online now some years ago, is, and you can download this if anyone wants the URL, and let me know and I'll give it to you. They have put online a catalogue of of recordings made by Russia's ethnic minorities from very early years up until about the late 60s. And the Jewish sections, I think, has about 400 recordings there, and some of them are extremely interesting, but they're all single-sided. And this didn't make sense to me at all, because I knew the dates when these recordings came out, and this was way beyond the era of the single-sided disc. And so I thought, why not? And then it took me years before the penny dropped, and I thought, I think I know what these probably are. And so I inquired a bit more deeply. And what these catalogues are catalogues of the metal masters that the National Sound Archive in Moscow holds. Now, provided they've been well looked after, and the archive itself says not all of them are necessarily in the best condition, but even so, there's a possibility that because it's the sound you get from these metal masters can be, not always, can be something in a different league. So that is something that lies in the future to be investigated.
Yes, much work.
Yeah,
Much
well,
work.
well, let's hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
what I'm thinking is, if they've got that number of these extremely rare metal masters, then it does indicate that that possibly they have a much larger number of shellac records. So they may be able to fill some of the gaps in the EMI archives, because they don't have a full stock of everything that they produce. It varies a lot from area to area, from genre to genre. I would say of the Ashkenazic recordings, the survival rate has been about 50%. When we did the Sephardic project with Edwin Sarusi, the survival rate for the Sephardic stuff was about 90%. So it does vary a lot, but why it varies, I don't know.
There's a question here that I want to see if we can get you to talk about a little bit that Joel has put. He says this is a little bit of a non sequitur, so forgive me for sort of swerving the topic. But Joel mentions that Belf did record for the Gramophone Company as well as for Sirena, but the discs aren't in the archive. I assume Mike will talk about that, or Jeff Wallach, but maybe you can take a crack at that one.
Oh, except to confirm, no, the discs aren't there. Probably because of the outbreak of the First World War. They were recorded in, I can't remember, was it February, March 1914? Normally it took between 3 to 6 months for them to reach the shops, and by that time the war had broken out, and people had better things to do than ferry 78s from Russia to London.
Yeah, yeah.
What I'm hoping is, yes, some of those metal masters are of Belf, of the Gramophone Company's Belf recordings. Not many, but some.
Okay, well, we're galloping towards what must be the end of our session soon, and so what I'd like to do is I want to spin one more disc, or at least a part of one more disc. This is one of that Michael shared with me the other day, and which I like particularly. This is one of the Russian Cabaret.
Oh, good.
Discs.
That, right?
Yeah, let's do this. This is the Morskaya, E.A. Morskaya. You want to tell us a little bit about this one? I think it's awesome. So you tell us what it is, and I'll get us queued up.
Well, it turns out, and this is something that I've only been delving into recently in detail. There's a whole subgenre of Russian female singers, cabaret singers, who specialized in either songs which were sung in Russian to a well-known kind of Jewish melody, or also songs which were sung not necessarily to a Jewish melody, but half in Yiddish and half in Russian. And they are very, very saucy. Honestly, I mean, it's pre-Berlin Cabaret. Never got this licentious.
Amazing.
This is one of those. And all these women went under pseudonyms for some reason or another. And this lady's name, this is Morskaya Volna, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, which translates as ocean wave or sea wave. Obviously.
Okay.
And
well, let's keep.
I'd say we also, and this is amazing, this one. I still don't believe it. And there was also a very good thing called Verochka Kolibri, which is Little Vera, the hummingbird. And she's a very, very good singer. It turns out that she was only 2 foot 4 inches tall.
Amazing.
And there's a photo of her a postcard photo of her on YouTube with 3 of her recordings. But this one, I'm not quite sure what she's going on about, but this is a
She's very intent about it.
some kind of harangue by a very spicy threat.
Как нас с собой посмею, поверьте, я сумею. Про Санта-Клер куплеты вам пропеть нельзя. Ведь Санта-Клер в соте распространен в народе. Сейчас пропою вам, господа. Ох, Санта-Клер девиз Парижа с головы этажа ниже господа подражает темнорос. Денег взять повсюду изъяна, одеваются обезьяны. Словом, наш народ идет вперед. Девицы, дамы, все мужчины сами наряжаются, как петухи, да? Теперь понятно, различить меня со всех нет разницы между птицей и людьми. Вот, например, возьмемся девицы, там коснемся. Головы до ног одежды Санта-Клер, нацеплены утути, петухи и гуси, словом, мотиву всем пример. Ляски с огородом, с кожи все похожи на пирожи, словом, ей, признаюсь, грош цена. На ногах, но еле-еле, вдруг они бы полетели, кукурезу вскрикнули тогда. Девицы, дамы, все мужчины сами наряжаются, как петухи, да? Теперь понятно, различить меня со всех лет разницы между птицей и людьми.
It's amazing. Oh. Okay. Yes, that is a phenomenal, it's a phenomenal track. I love it.
Oh, it's a drug.
So just we will follow up with all of this. We'll follow up with all of these tracks because Michael's prepared a track list of 12 discs. And I will, just like we did for Sherry's, I will forward a link to a Google Drive where you can listen to all of those tracks and then look at Michael's notes about them a day or two after this. And I want to open it up for questions. And so we're going to go out of the pin view. I'm going to go back into gallery view. And I know that we have a couple of the tech team here from Klezmer Archive Project. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand, throw it in the chat, and let's talk. Daniel Lentz, are there currently plans to digitize this? I can say for myself that we are hoping that the Klezmer Archive Project can be involved in some way in digitizing and reorganizing and making searchable all of Michael's work. But I'm going to throw it back to you, Michael.
Well, to digitize everything in the long term. Yeah, so the discography is only really a search tool in order to find the records and get them saved before it's too late and digitize whatever and distribute it on as wide a scale as possible. And it may not be, that sounds a bit extreme, but it's not necessarily an impossible task, nor need it necessarily be a very expensive one, because we know, for example, that the National Science Archive in Israel has already done it. It's digitized, I think, about 20,000 78s. At the moment, they're not allowed to put them online. They did put them online some years ago, but were forced to take it off because someone somewhere got a bit jittery about copyright and so on. But there's a good chance that it will, at some stage, they will be coming back online. And then there's the EMI archive. Now, the EMI archive makes me nervous because I said to Christina the other day, no, sound archives do have a nasty habit of going up in flames. And well, they do. Nothing lasts forever. So really, it ought to be the stuff ought to be digitized, if nothing else, digitized and distributed, so that if anything did happen, then it's there.
There's copies. There's copies. Yeah. I have a question from Dan Karkner, and then I see Sherry with her hand up, and then Ilana has a question. So I'm going to read Dan's question, which is, any references, Michael, to mystery record labels you have come across that you were never able to find anything more about? Good question, Daniel.
Probably is the unsatisfactory answer. I can't think off the top of my head, but yes, there are a couple, I do believe. And if you give me your email, or has everybody got, and let me address everyone on this, has everybody got my email? If
Yes.
not, I'll put it in the chat now.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do that. I'll do it. I'm gonna just do it right here. And we will follow up with another email, just like we did for Sherry, where we'll make all of this information available again. But there's Michael's email there. Great. Sherry, you have a question?
Yeah, Michael, does the EMI archive contain just Gramophone and Zonophone, or are there other labels that got deposited there as well?
Yeah, there are some Columbia discs, but Columbia, that's another job that I was never able to start because of the archive closing down. But yeah, they certainly have some Columbia. They do have some. They've got a huge amount of Columbia documentation, which no one has ever looked at or catalogued, so I've no idea what it consists of. They do have fragmentary documentation for other record labels like Baker, Pate. I think I had Jumbo and Janus.
What about favorite? Do they have any favorite?
No, unfortunately. Actually, that does bring me. That does bring me on to something. A question that I was going to raise. There's a real mystery here. Gramophone Company was the biggest company operating in Europe. Its main rival was Pate in terms of size. At least that's what I'm given to believe. Yet on the domestic market, because I'm excluding here the contents of the EMI archive, on the domestic market, hardly any of the Gramophone Company's Jewish recordings exist, whereas the favorite ones are everywhere and they're still coming to light almost every week. How do you explain that? I see Rainer might be able to. I was wondering whether if Rainer's here this evening, which he is.
He is.
You can't.
That's a moment for me also to interrupt and thank all of you. I see some big names here. Rainer, thanks for coming. And I see Nikos again, and you, Julian. Martin Schwartz is here, amongst others. And I know that Michael has a couple of friends, Ilya.
Oh, is Ilya still there? I'm just saying, because I feel very guilty about all the people I haven't said hello to, but
so
some have gone already in disgust. Yeah.
So thanks to all of you for coming. Does anybody else have a question? Ilana had asked, did many Klezmer tracks come from the Riga plant?
I mean, you mean were they pressed there? Yeah, all the Belf ones for a start.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about the other ones. They which came. Oh, let's see. Yeah, I would imagine those Odessa ones would have been pressed in Riga as well. All those the Jewish Wedding Orchestra, the Bach Orchestra. Probably, almost certainly, all of those would have been pressed in Riga, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked earlier, I think it might have been Daniel Karkner, about the Julian and Michael's CDs, and I would direct you to the Gramophone In Focus website, where I have links. I've put links for all three of those CDs directly to Honest John's, where you can order them in North America and in Europe. But there's the three CDs there. The Chekhov's Band recording from 2015, also Wandering Stars, which is music from Gimpel's Lemberg Theater, and then Warsaw's Jewish Mermaid, which is Sirena recordings from the Orvoma Archive. Can you tell us 30 seconds about this archive, Julian and Michael, maybe?
On the go, Julian.
Unmute yourself.
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, this was a project from Finland, from the Finnish Sound Archive, who were gifted a set of, or a complete collection of recordings collected by Orvama, who was a major record producer, had a label in Finland, which was the second largest label in the country. And this collection was put together by himself, and I suspect his parents as well. And the archive wanted some of the material to be digitized and put out on for general consumption. So they commissioned Michael, us, and Pekka Gronau to produce a CD of this material, which was a fascinating project. And yeah, we put it all together.
Since I've got you unmuted, Julian, do you and Michael have any plans to be doing any more CD releases or another project that you're cooking up right now?
I think I'd love to do another CD, but sadly, there's no market for CDs anymore. I mean, I was approached by Honest John's. I always had an idea of doing a CD of North African Jewish music, but the only way of doing that now would probably be to put it out on vinyl, which is the only way this material really is sold. And really the economics makes no sense at all. And the amount we're getting from Spotify and iTunes isn't even worth thinking about. So really, it's no longer a viable method of putting this stuff out.
Okay, John Demetric says.
Can I say something to Julian? Oh, no.
John Demetric
Sure.
says, I bought a CD today, but yes, we know it. Anybody else have a question? And then maybe we'll. If there's any more questions, we'll take them. And if there aren't any questions, how about we spin another disc and I'll let Michael. I'll let Michael choose.
God, I can't remember what the choice is.
Okay, choices are. We know what we didn't listen to is the Shulim Pozamchi, that one that. Everybody.
Let's have that one. I love that one.
Let's have that one. Okay, so this is a very interesting track, and I'm going to tell you that it was recorded in 19 early. It was recorded in 19 early. Let me get to Michael's extended notes. Michael, do you happen to know off the top of your head when this was recorded?
No.
Oh,
Circa 1910.
1910.
Oh, no,
And then Kisselhoff, our dear friend Kisselhoff, publishes a very similar melody in 1912. But this one is first. This one comes first, and Michael has filed it under Hasidish.
Yeah, but it's satirical, I do believe. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Oh, no, definitely.
Wir kuscheln jeden, den machen wir zufrieden, bei keinem kein Meure, wir hieten Gott teure, war wegen sich schlechten, wenn da keiner nicht rechten, aber die sagten nein, sei können wir nicht sein, und das es passiert in dir kommen nicht wieder drauf und gehalten von kein Schabbes geroga gegen dein Messias wer geroga gegen dein Messias wenn wir an der Tür stehen mit den Tagen in Gehen, hat ich verstellen, dass sie mir geben sie auch nie. Mit Kuscharawaie, na Terek nicht nahe, aber die Deutschen, nein, sei will nicht wieder reinig sein. Haben die Zeit darauf, wir Leute in der Restaurant, ihr sollt trinken, essen, in den Damen nicht vergessen. Gerne sei ja gegen dein Messias. Gerne sei ja gegen dein Messias. Lebe dich, Katze, lebe dich, Butter, lebe dich, Katze, lebe dich, Butter,
Phenomenal. Do you want to tell us a little more about this track, Michael?
Well, I can only make out some of it. I think at one stage he says something about they go to a restaurant and they eat and they drink and they forget to pray. I think that's one. But yeah, this would be a typical Yiddish theatre satire on there was no love lost between the very secular-minded Yiddish theatre and the Hasidim. They poked fun at them wherever they could, and for many, many decades, and could get quite nasty sometimes.
Right.
So my assumption is, and Podzamcze was a very important figure in the Yiddish theatre in Vienna. He came from the Lemberg area, and I would have thought that he would be promoting his song would be just perhaps gently taking the mickey out of the Hasidim yet again.
Yeah, Daniel Berkowitz asked the question, is this considered to be a folk song or an art song? And that's a very tricky question indeed, I think. Anybody in the crowd want to take a... Jeff Wallach, I see you got your hand up. Unmute yourself, will you?
Yes. It's not a folk, it's not a real folk song. Now you had on the, years ago on the Na Capella, you had the song, Oi, Tate, Stay and Zitter. What's the name of that song? That's an example. And the interest, there are many, many such examples, making fun of the Hasidim, but in the folk style. They use Hasidic melodies and style of singing, which they also exaggerate. And there's so many records like this. And the interesting thing, this came up with that, for example, with that one in, that was actually recorded in a field, I think, originally from you guys, and what it is that some of these songs actually were readopted by the Hasidim themselves, which they took seriously.
Right.
And right?
Yeah.
That's an example, but yeah.
That song that you're talking about, I believe, is from, we called it the VOD recordings, and they were recorded in Bucharest. It was a bunch of Romanian, non-Jewish Romanian musicians who had been sort of corralled to go to Bucharest for an epic 5-day recording session where they recorded all of their Muresh music and all the music that they had, and they sort of like kept them locked in that studio until they'd wrung out all the music. And at the end of this pages and pages of catalogs is this 24 minutes of Jewish material, and that song is one of them. And so these non-Jewish Romanian musicians had remembered this song that they had performed for the Jewish community before and then also after the Second World War. So, and in fact, one of the other tracks on one of the other tracks on Michael's playlist is a Hungarian, what I know is one of the Hungarian folk tunes from Szatmár that we learned in Nykapelia as sort of a folkloric version, but here we have it Günther Aurel performing it as a theater song. So it's like this I think what you were talking about is this interplay between theatrical or cabaret songs then being sort of, or in this case, satirical Hasidic songs being then readopted by a more religious community in some way. Does that comport with what you're
Right.
thinking?
And then, yes, and I remember I also at the same time I found, and I played it for you guys.
I know, I
a
remember. Yeah.
recording from the radio, from the Begelman sisters,
Totally,
of
I
that
remember
same
that.
song, done in a kind of Yiddish swing style.
Totally.
That
We were
was
sitting in a
recorded in-
restaurant in the Lower East Side somewhere, and I remember you had it on a little cassette player. Yes, that was the best.
Right after the concert, yeah.
Totally, totally, totally. Yeah. So anybody else have a question or a comment? There's all kinds of stuff going on here. Yes, Martin Schwartz, I see you. Go ahead and unmute. Oh gosh, Martin, for some reason we can't hear you. You're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Do you want to type us something in the chat? Type us something in the chat, Martin. Oh, Joel Rubin says, Martin, that you may have to turn on your microphone not only in the Zoom room, but also like on your computer somehow. I don't know how that is, but okay. If you can figure out how to do it, you can at least, I hope, Martin, type us a little telegram in the chat if you'd be so kind. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Anyone else? Okay, well, it's 3:50, and was that somebody? No. On behalf of Klezmer Institute and let's see, I'm gonna mute Martin until we get, there we go. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's come today. It's been such a pleasure to hear from Michael about his work. It's just we've just scratched the surface, and I hope we'll get a chance to do this again. So if for those of you who are here and who purchased tickets through Eventbrite, thank you so much. If you came in through a direct link, the Klezmer Institute is always grateful for small donations to help support this kind of programming. Every bit counts. But we don't want anyone to feel like they're excluded from these conversations because of financial constraints. So just keep that in mind. But thanks for being here. And I'd like to, so we're going to take a couple of weeks of a break from these discussions. But it's because we have lots of other exciting things that are happening around the Klezmer Institute. In 2 weeks on Sunday, we're having our first anniversary. We're calling it the Annie Digi. It's the anniversary digitize-a-thon for the KMDMP project. That's the Kisselhoff Makonovetsky Digital Manuscript Project. And if you want to talk about amazing volunteer crowdsourced projects, this is one of them. We have a corpus of 1,400 melodies that have been that we've had access to through high-resolution photographs. And participants in this project have digitally notated more than 700 of these melodies in only 1 year, which is this astonishing feat of dedication and love and passion for this music. And we were really happy to be able to feature the music at Yiddish Summer Weimar this summer and see a lot of it come to life in concerts. But this little Digitize-a-thon event is going to be an opportunity for us to like really sort of celebrate each other for having dug into this work, and we'll hear some music. We have some exciting news from the Klezmer Archive team, which is going to be debuting maybe a little bit of a demo of a musical search tool that they've been cooking up. We have Jonathan Malin is going to present on some of his preliminary results of musicological analysis of the Berdichevsky corpus using corpus studies techniques. So we've got a lot of really cool events and sort of little program hours scheduled for that weekend. It's going to be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. in the afternoon, Berlin time to 1 in the morning. And we even have one of our colleagues tuning in from Tokyo to do a presentation on her research. That's Mariko Mishiro, who's been working diligently on the material, and she's going to be presenting on her work as well. So that's Sunday, November 14th. The next weekend, we'll be speaking with Professor Jeffrey Wallach on sort of creating, like, taking this discographical work, such as the collecting that Sherry's done, and the discographical research that Michael's done, and putting it together, and how we get to understanding history and what we understand about historical performance styles. We have a number of topics that we'll be looking at, and I think listening to, that relate to the 2 conversations and the 3 conversations we've had already. On December 5th, we will have a roundtable discussion with all of our discussants, Sherry, with Michael, with Paul Gifford, and with Jeffrey, to talk about where we go from here. I think there's a number of issues and ideas and questions that have emerged and are emerging through these conversations, and we're going to get all together and just sort of talk about those things all together. And so that particular event is co-sponsored by Yiddish New York, and it will be a preliminary event for Yiddish New York this year. So I would love to let everybody unmute themselves, say hi, say goodbye. It's been so lovely to have you here, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.